Wow, this is amazing. Thank you. So I'm humbled to be here, truly humbled, and to be part of this process where you celebrate better politics. And I'd like to talk about three things tonight. Number one, I'm here to support Springtide Collective. And I just think it's important that we celebrate, democratic politics in Canada and particularly in Nova Scotia. I love the way they do it. I want to talk about that. And I want to be here with this party for all the nominees and to celebrate them in this Better Politics Award. So I came for the party. Number two, if I could, I'd like just to share some observations in that spirit of better politics about the state of play in Ottawa these days. Since October 2015, the election, but even in the context of around the election and kind of going forward. So just some personal observations about the state of politics and policies, because I think it is kind of connected to better politics. And finally, if it's okay, just share a few lessons from my own experiences as Mark said, I was the parliamentary budget officer. So what was that like? And I'm sure some of these lessons will probably sound pretty familiar to the nominees. Not that I deserve any kind of awards, I don't, but it's that same experience of trying to bring about positive change and working with our political system. Honestly, thank you, Springtide, for inviting me for all kinds of reasons. And for one is just, I love coming to Halifax. It's just an amazing city. I love the flight. It's like an hour and a half. You're here. I love the drive-in. You probably don't like it. But I like the drive-in. It feels like you're always going downhill, which is an amazing feeling. And there's like all these, I grew up in northwestern Ontario, and you see like the rocks and the lakes, and it just feels like home. And I love going over the bridge, the famous bridge, and going through the harbors, and then driving through these old parts of the city. And for some reason, I got to stay at this amazing hotel, the Lord Nelson Hotel, which is like a historic hotel. Also, I remember this town is kind of special to me because I remember after I graduated, and we have a student here I was talking to that was studied with my son. After I graduated, I came to my wife's from England, and she said, we have to go to England, you have to meet my relatives. We were living in sin. This isn't videotaped, is it? Because my kids might find out that their parents lived in sin for a while at university. And but then my wife said, no, we have to go to England, you have to meet my relatives before we actually make this legal, this relationship. And I said, I haven't even seen my own country yet. So we have no money, right? We're students. We bought this beat-up Toyota Tercel. My brother was, a newly fledged RCMP officer working in Kitimat, BC, which is like the middle of nowhere, northern BC. And I said, okay, first year, we're going out. We're driving. I was working at the Department of Finance. We took that Toyota Tercel, all the, breaking down and everything and whatever. We found a way to get to Kitimat and visit friends. And then the next year, I said, okay, we have to go to the East Coast. And so we were traveling through these great towns like Quebec City and go through New Brunswick and Bay of Fundy Parks. And we stayed in Halifax. And I'll never forget this, but my wife said, this is the nicest city in the country. She says, this is my favorite place. And we never got to live here. So we love coming here. And but I'll never forget that. I remember her, she was also pregnant with our firstborn. And it was just that kind of time of, this city. So it just seems so beautiful, so familiar. And so you're spoiled rotten, and you don't deserve it. So a few weeks ago, I had this moment. I always have moments, and not always, but sometimes. And I found myself watching TV like you folks always do. I come home from work, I teach at a university, marking some papers or whatever. Turn on CNN, listen to Wolf Blitzer, Anderson Cooper, and then all of a sudden they kick in, and then there's the CNN Republican debates, which have been hard to watch, right? But it's for some TV, you don't know why you watch it, but you still watch it because you can't believe it could be that bad. But they never surprise you, so I remember getting a little bit disappointed, and this is well after our 2015 election. I was worried about the country. Honestly, I'm sure a lot of you folks were. I just didn't like the politics. It wasn't partisan in the sense, I voted conservative in the past. I voted Liberal. I voted NDP. I voted Green Party. And we'll see if the marijuana party makes it, once we legalize it, whether they have a political party, maybe I'll vote for them. But it was just, I didn't like the direction. And then you watch the stuff, they're playing out this type of politics playing out in the Republican debates, and I didn't like it. And almost next morning I wake up, I read the local paper, then I have on my iPad, I do actually have an iPad even though I write down things on notes, and I read various newspapers, and I love reading the New York Times, and there's one editorialist, David Brooks, you can always guarantee he's going to beat up on the Republicans, even though he's kind of a conservative, and he's just not happy with the state of politics. So I read his piece, and I'm reading it, and he talks about this book, In Defense of Politics, which was written by a fellow named Crick. Probably somebody already knows. I've written it down here somewhere. Bernard Crick. It was written in 1962, and he was quoting. David Brooks is a good writer. He's often on these sort of Charlie Rose shows. I love listening to him. He writes a wide array, and he starts quoting from this book about how important politics is and how we're forgetting, these lessons and what's at stake here, and these people that actually bring about change. And and at the same time, he's telling basically the Republican Party, which I think is his party, this isn't good. And then so I went out, immediately I got to read the book. So I get the book, and I start reading it, and it's starting to sink in. And then I find out there's another book written, like a 50-year anniversary. It's really more of an essay by this fellow Matthew Flinders, who wrote this book. He wrote called Defending Politics in 2012. So then I'm reading that book. This is all within a number of hours, and again, these are more essays than books, so they're not like these large books. And then, I get an email from Sarah Simpson and Mark Coffin saying, hey, remember, you got to come to this event. And don't forget, like it's on such and such date, and, the typical efficiency of Springtime Collective. It's here's all here's the plane ticket, and this is, where the hotel you're staying at. Here's the timelines. It's all completely well organized. So then I said, whoa, I got this event coming up. So I hit, go on the website. And I'm looking at the website, and I'm saying, well, what is like the vision and mission of this organization? And I'm, reading, wow, making democracy better. I like that, And then, what are they about? And they're about engagement, and they're about positive change, and they're about celebrating politics that are going here. Then I'm actually going through some of these videos. Now, I've just realized as they're coming onto the stage, this is the lady that contributed to those unbelievable creative videos, which I recommend. I think, I would, if I was teaching it, in fact, I'll make sure my students look at some of them. And maybe I'll test them on some of these videos, which speak to really important things there, institutions and how this stuff is set up. Then I start to realize, like, everything I was reading from those books that I really liked, like that book by Crick, and then the book by Flinders on how to, In Defense of Politics, it's like embedded into everything I was reading on the website, both and so, like I said, this is something special. So if I have like my first message is that, and it's really why I'm here, like we need to support this organization. That this is an organization, Springtime Collective, and I'm looking at this group here, and I've already had a chance to talk with some of you. It's pretty special. Like you need to nurture this organization. You need to protect it. This is like I think the second year of these awards. Like I'm hoping we're still doing these awards 10 years from now, and this continues to grow. Exactly that was said by in the opening address. When I look at go to websites and these organizations, just I apologize. I'm a former parliamentary budget officer. I look at like how big is it? How do they work? Who's on the board? Like who's the team? So you read about Mark, and you read about some of the other people in the team. Then you read about the advisors. Sarah's name is there. And then you read about or the board of directors and the advisors. And you realize this is like a really diverse, strong team. And then you see some of the people that won the awards last year and why you won, and then just actually, this is a really healthy team. So then I go back to some of these messages in these books that I'm reading from Crick and from Flinders, and I'm seeing like this is Springtime Collective. And number one well, I think there's a few messages, a couple of really big ones I'm just going to highlight. Number one is that you must celebrate. Again, this is from Crick and Flinders. We must celebrate our democratic achievements and practices, that the fruits of democratic politics are all around us. And we forget that. So even I'm walking from the Lord Nelson, just a beautiful 20-minute walk down whatever that street's name is. I'm going past hospitals schools like, St. Mary's. I'm going past beautiful architecture. I'm walking down these roads, and this is stuff that we actually can thank politics for actually bringing to our country, bringing to Halifax. Actually, we have people here from the city of Halifax that make sure that we have this great infrastructure. But this is politics. So politics is, and this is what one of the messages from Cricks and from Flinders, it improves our lives. Like, and again, I'm thinking like, I'm remembering now in terms of that moment why I had to read these books, why I even need to be here, because I was feeling so down after I was watching the Republican debates. But they improve people's lives. We wouldn't have these great facilities, including this amazing university, if it wasn't for people coming together, political people making these decisions, supporting the collective, really, because these are collective goods, right? This is what brings us together. This is what springtime does. And why does springtime? It's springtime collective. So I think reading into its DNA of this organization, to me, it sounds positive. The second message from Crick and Flinders in these books, like it talk about defense of politics or defending politics, is that politics needs revitalization. I mean, that was so clear to me when you watch the Republican debate. They need revitalization. They hopefully will use this as an opportunity to revitalize. For me, that was true with our country last fall, the fall of 2015. We needed to revitalize politics. And the way to make politics, like the way to shift politics, to make it politics to be more optimistic, and the way to move it away from the politics of pessimism, or the politics of fear, to attack politics, corrosive cynicism, is through education. It's always education. It's about St. Mary's University, but it's about what Springtime Collective does for us. It's about social dialogue, which is Springtide. It's about engagement. So this is what Springtide lives for. So again, I'm thinking like this is why this organization is so important, and we need to nurture it and care for it. There's a great quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that I like. It was in the book. It says, "Better to light a candle than to curse in the dark." Better to light a candle than to curse in the dark. So when you see these problems with politics and it needs to be revitalized, you need to go to organizations that bring us together so that we can revitalize it. This is revitalization right here. The stories, not just it's MLAs, but it's also local politics. It's public interest people trying to make our lives better. That you work with the system to make it better. This is revitalization. This is why I had to be here. Had to be here. Plus, I love coming to Halifax. The other thing is this is not a spectator sport, democracy. Like, you cannot turn the other way and say, oh, everything is going to be fine. Like, I think one of our biggest enemies is public apathy. So when I wrote that book, and I'm not forcing anybody to buy the book, but I'm sure Penguin will be happy. I promise you I'm not getting rich on this book. But the first title I wanted to call it was The Cost of Indifference. I didn't want to call it Unaccountable. The publisher said, no, you have to call it Unaccountable. You won't sell any books if you call it The Cost of Indifference. But to me, I worry about public apathy and the sight that, the political people, they're all like certain senators that are in trial right now, or they're all corrupt, or they can't solve big problems. Then public apathy sets in. Then we're in trouble. So that's why you have to have Springtime Collective to say no. We have so much to be thankful for. So I think, Springtide helps us to be players in the spectator sport. It's not a spectator sport. The other point that Crick makes in his article is that democratic politics will not make every sad heart happy. He said that in 1962. We can't solve every problem. That's not politics. We can't make everybody happy. There will always be sad hearts. But he also said this is the great civilizing human activity. It is politics. It is how we come together on these really tough issues and we compromise. And I thought that was beautiful. So I think it helps us. I think we need these organizations. We need them more than ever right now because they tell us that as we face some of these bigger challenges, I'm going to talk about them very briefly, like we need to be reminded that this is not going to be solved by Monday. Republicans are not going to fix their problems by Monday. And so it's going to take time, and we need to work with it. We can't become disengaged. So just an observation about the state of politics and policy in Ottawa. Because I had that experience. Again, as Mark said, I was a public servant for decades, worked in different places. I was actually the Prime Minister Harper's, in fact, his assistant secretary for macroeconomic policy. So I would work, like the Prime Minister's office is in the Longevin building. They were on the first and second floor. I was on the third floor. And so we briefed the Prime Minister every day on the economy. And I did that for 2 years before I became the parliamentary budget officer. But I didn't like the way things were unfolding. I didn't like, I really was honored to be parliamentary budget officer, but I didn't like when I was watching the politics. I was not a politician. I had a calculator. I provided numbers on issues, but I didn't like the way things were playing out in the city. I'll talk about that briefly. But I just have this sense right now, and this is not a partisan comment, but I think we are potentially on the cusp of positive change. Like, it's not there yet. You can't taste it, but you can see it. At least it's in the language of some of our political leaders. The Liberals are bringing it, I hope the Conservatives revitalize. I hope the NDP revitalize. I hope the Green Party grows. And I hope we don't lose something that we're starting to talk about right now. It was, for me, remarkable when Prime Minister Trudeau said, I'm bringing back cabinet government. Whoa, cabinet government. So, it's not just like the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office making all the decisions, but we're going to have huge respect for every cabinet minister and what they get to bring to the table. So it's really government by the executive, not just the Prime Minister. A little less authoritarian. I got to be careful because the last time I was in Halifax, it was for a fundraiser, and I said our Prime Minister was Putinesque. And I didn't realize it, but a cartoonist took that and said, and there was a cartoonist, and it had, typical page, bald head, boring, looking in front of a computer. Secretary comes in with a newspaper saying, or not a newspaper, the telephone saying, it's Mr. Putin. He wants to talk to you. He says he doesn't like the comment. That's Nova Scotia, right? These are hard hitters in Nova Scotia. And the cartoonists are the best, obviously, in the world. The website's amazing. Now I can see the connection with it, and I can't even see what's going on. I'm sure I don't want to see. But then I think the Prime Minister also talking about new relationships. I mean, we're already even just here, just talking about people, how things are changing. Like new relationships with citizens, new relationships with Aboriginal people, new relationships with Parliament, new relationships, with provinces and territories, and mayors and premiers, and new relationships with other countries. There's a buzz in Ottawa as I left it about the Prime Minister going to Washington. That wasn't there even before. Like, whoa, a state dinner? Are you kidding me? They're actually going to feed him? That's and this is like the red carpet treatment. But it's a type of leadership, and I'm not personalizing it. I'm not saying it's liberal. It could be conservative, it could be NDP, it could be Green Party that says, we're going to tackle big issues. For that younger generation, and there's some of them getting awards here today, we're going to stop kicking the can down the road. It's going to take a long time. We're going to be on this road for a while. But we are going to tackle climate change. That's amazing. We had a premier's meeting on climate change. We had a premier's meeting before they went to Paris to talk about climate change. That is change. That's revitalization. Just a meeting. Just get together in a room, right? That is politics. Already, that is, to me, that's already progress. Like, we're moving the ball down that field out here, right? They always, one thing I don't like about this university wins everything. Like, really, this is like I'm not even really like a key sports guy, but everybody knows this university because they just win. But also, we're going to bring in refugees. Not 10,000, no, 25, maybe even 50. Like, if Germany can take 1 million, we could at least take 50,000. We're going to tackle health care. We've been yakking about pharmacare. We've been yakking about long-term care. Let's see if we can get some public servants together, see if we can actually do something, not even for my generation, but maybe for the younger generation that's here. We're going to fix institutions. We're going to open up information, this government is saying. We're going to actually even tackle electoral reform. You know what? They can't do that by themselves. None of those issues. This has to be done with everybody's support. You have to work with the provinces and the municipalities. You have on every one of these issues to bring about any kind of progress. So it absolutely needs a new style of leadership, political leadership. This is politics changing. This is revitalization. But there's some headwinds out there. We've got to be honest. Like even the economy is slowing down. It's not a strong economy. If you're going to tackle these big issues, yeah, you would love tailwinds. You want to have a strong economy that's, 3% growth, unemployment rate below whatever, 6%, everybody, doing fine, good balance sheets. We don't have that luxury. It's going to make it harder in this government. I was people, even on the walk over here, I get an email from somebody sends me from CBC saying, the public service in Ottawa, it's not what it needs to be. We maybe, some of our skills have atrophied. We're not as transparent. This is a CBC article that was posted just like, an hour ago. This is a bit of a headwind for a government saying, I got to bring in refugees now. I wanted to bring in so many by Christmas, and then I wanted February. You got to deliver for me. They come out of this meeting in Vancouver on climate change. I need working groups. I need people to give me ideas on, how do we make energy more renewable? About, how do we implement, what's the price on carbon? How do we do carbon taxes? We need a strong public service. They got to deliver. And then there's always politics, petty politics, right? This is always, some of it is good, but some of it is not so good. It's more corrosive. Then there are expectations. Well, we got to solve this right away. This is easy, climate change, then we can do refugees, then we'll do, infrastructure, and, then we'll just, electoral reform. We've had the system since Confederation, but we'll change it in no time. Like we start to think like we can, we got to be careful how we set these expectations. Which kind of brings me again back to that book, Crick and Flinders, and then the work of, Springtide, Collective, which they go on to say, we must not allow our political system to be synonymous with failure. We cannot let it fail. We need to revitalize it. These people are heroes that are getting these awards. Plus they get a copy of this book, which is amazing. Because they go on, and Crick and Flinders, what they say is, if we fail, there'll be more apathy. And we're already drowning in apathy. I get in front of students every day, and I ask them all, who voted? We ran a campaign at the University of Ottawa, we called it I Vote, Je Vote, to get raised. The last election in 2011, it was like, I think it was less than 40% of my students voted in that cohort of kind of, voting age up to 25. Apparently the number is quite a bit higher right now. But you have a problem, long-term democracy, if this younger generation are not even engaged. They're not even voting. So failure would increase apathy. It would increase this distrust. So we have to help these political people. We need to be engaged. We need to keep not just the pressure on them through oversight, but giving them ideas, working with them, showing up at meetings like this one, thanks to Springtide Collective. So we need Springtime Collective. So finally, just like a few lessons learned from the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office job. I didn't want it. I said that, I didn't want the job. Nobody wanted it, honestly. I was the Prime Minister's Assistant Secretary at PCO. Nice job. I knew, I felt comfortable, had a great, looked out the window, I could see the Peace Tower. I got to do the briefing, could pick up the phone, I asked if we were working on a budget issue. I could phone any department. They'd say, well, how can we help the Prime Minister? Again, just that kind of, there's like nobody wanted to be, okay, now we're going to work for Parliament. We're going to give parliamentarians information they've never seen before, and we're going to see how that plays out. Nobody wanted that job. I swear to you, nobody. And, I honestly, I've said this before, I think I was the only person in the interview. And in the interview, I said I didn't want the job. Yeah. And, there's people that were there in the interview, like one of my former bosses, Don Drummond, who was a great economist, way better than me, and it was a strange interview. Like at half the interview, I'm saying I don't want the job. Then the other half of the interview, he's answering the questions from the. But it was, for me, it felt like we knew we had an experiment. It was just an experiment in the sense, like, what happens? Like, what if we actually gave information we were giving prime ministers and finance ministers, like just not political information, but just like boring, numbers. This is what this could cost. Wars, fighter planes, crime bills, changes to old age security. What if instead of in the past we would just give that to the finance minister and the prime minister, and they would decide that what actually would trickle out to members of parliament? What if we put together a team of people? So we gave them everything, like documents, like thick documents, and with executive summaries and people's names on them, and they were peer reviewed. Like, how would that play out? What happens? Would they be able to hold the executive to account? And what happens if we were created an organization that the next generation? I was talking to some of them here before, just the fellows that just graduated. They actually looked at this organization and say, "Whoa, that's like my generation organization. That's not like an old guy generation or old woman generation. This is like transparent. This is like they're putting work out. They're putting it on the website. They're talking to people, and on every big issue, they would try to be on every big issue. They didn't decide what the issues were, but they would provide information on these issues. And what happens if we try to build a culture within our organizations that we weren't cynical? It's not our job to say, go to war, don't go to war, buy a fighter plane, don't buy a fighter plane, but we just provided the analysis. And we didn't opine on whether this was a good decision or not, but at least give them something that they could use, in the context of political accountability. Is this the right priority for the country? Is this the right policy direction? What kind of national defense system do we want? What kind of retirement system do we want? What kind of correctional system? That's not our job. That's a tough job. That's a political job. And like I said, I didn't want the job. With great humility, I needed to be totally 100% pushed to do the job. And it was people that I had worked with that I started phoning. I said, well, what do you think? Like, if I took this job, would you come? And, these people have names like Mustafa Scary, who I used to mark papers for him at university like 40 years ago. He was finishing his PhD while I was a student. And then Sahir Khan, who I'd hired to work, basically was a private sector guy in New York City that wanted to come to Ottawa to raise a family. He was tired of traveling. And just a terrific kind of sense for costing and things like that. So they said, no, you got to do it. We can do it. And Mustafa was an Iranian. I remember when I was studying at Queen's, he had part of his family stuck in Iran. And he said, Kevin, I'd like to do something for my country if that's okay with you. That's what he said. I don't care if I get fired. And Sahir said, you know what? I'm Indian. My dad just came here. We just want to do something for our country. I'm a private sector guy anyway. I'll make money. I don't care. And for me, to be honest, even then I wasn't convinced, but I had suffered this amazing, this loss in our family. I lost a son in an accident while I was doing that Privy Council office job. And I was really struggling. And I didn't feel like I fit anymore in the public service. And our family was really hurting. I wasn't sure if I should take the job because our family was hurting so much, or I should take the job and maybe I could help the family somehow by saying, we're not kneeling down here. We're going to get back on our feet. And, I had 2 younger kids that lost a brother. So I think the lesson I learned from my son, Tyler, was there's no security. You just disappear like that anyway. So what are we fighting for? Why don't you go there and give it a try? Which I'm pretty sure everybody that's getting an award here, they're trying for something that they feel is really important. So there were 3 lessons, that I often think about in terms of quotes. I love quotes. They just sort of stick in my head. And there's one from this British historian, Thomas Fuller, who said, everything is difficult before it's easy. You always know when you start something, it's going to get hard at the beginning. In the interview, I was saying, I don't want the job. I don't want to build an office where nobody's going to pick up the phone. I get no information. I don't want to go in front of those committees. They're nasty. I'm not going to get used to that. And I don't want to write reports that everybody's going to read. That's a hard thing to do. You got to nuance every word. You got to see whether or not, can you actually do that? I didn't want to do that. But once we got started and this team came, thanks to Mustafa and Sahir, and they would, these people are really smart. I'm not. These people, they know what they're doing, and they hire, everybody wants to work for these people. So they brought together this good team. Then you can start getting used to it. Wait a minute, I can go to committee. And Sahir was this type of person. He was literally worked on Wall Street for the better part of 10 years. His line as we left the building is, man, Kevin, I could smell napalm. This is going to be a great meeting. I said, well, I have to answer all the questions. You're just sitting next to me. He said, oh, this is fantastic. He was quoting from Apocalypse Now. But there was no apocalypse. No apocalypse. Well, at least I didn't think there was. I don't know, maybe Prime Minister Harper thought there was some. And then I love the quote from Einstein, in the middle of difficulty, you will find opportunity. So it was almost a mindset for the office. So we would start looking at every issue secrecy. There was that the whole town was shut down it seemed like under Prime Minister Harper. Information, like they knew if the Parliament, when I asked for information, it was like news within the Privy Council office and the Finance Department, and they had to manage it, and we got nothing. And so we said, like, oh, this is going to be really cool. Like, we'll just find a way to be like, their secret will be like the most transparent anybody's ever seen. Like everything we actually do, we'll put on the website. Even if we write a letter to a deputy minister saying we need information, he comes back and says, you can't have it, it's going on the website. Like we'll be so, everything we do, that you went for a trip, we're putting it on the website. Every paper had to go on the, and it's still there. We never took it off. So for us, like you got secrecy, we'll give you transparency. There's a Seinfeld program like that. George does it. George is like, he just finally admits in Seinfeld that, he was like, his life isn't really working, so he's just going to try the opposite. And it turned out like telling, really attractive women that you live at home and you have no job really was going to work. And it actually did work for George. And then like complexity is a tough issue. Like how do you cost a war? Like what's behind your calculations for death and disability? Like how do you cost an airplane? Like what do you estimate for like acquisition cost, operation sustainment cost? What's the difference between that and a CF-18? Like how do you cost a crime bill? A Truth in Sentencing Act, when you have more people that are, they lose this remand system. So then all of a sudden we're saying like that's complexity, that's scary. But then you say, you know what, this is like an amazing opportunity. We're gonna have to learn how to write. We have to have executive summaries that explain this stuff to people. Like what's behind these numbers. And we can never pretend that we know the number. So this is like, even for economists, this is an opportunity to talk about putting numbers out, ranges of numbers, uncertainty. So we said, complexity, that's actually, we could work with that. We'll fight it with good descriptions. Minority parliament, which is scary because every financial bill is a vote of confidence. A government could fall. In their very first year, Prime Minister Harper had to prorogue parliament so it didn't fall. And, so that's the nature. So you got to be on your game in a minority parliament. You can't put out crap that somebody's going to use and say, well, I'm sorry, I got the number wrong. But the government just fell. Like you can't do that. So it's like a minority parliament, we're even an advantage. We had a big recession in 2009, like a world financial crisis. All of a sudden we started saying, this is great. The economy's collapsing, they need us. Like everything kind of turned around saying, we'll find some way. They cut our budget by a third. We're saying, this is awesome. They cut our budget. Now we get to go to committee and say we're shutting down the office. Like they don't want information. You don't want it. If I don't have any clients, we're out of here. I'll go do something else. We have a really strong team. They all have other jobs. And then we had like a budget 2012 when the government said, now that they had a majority, you know what, we could freeze spending for like 5 years and there's no impact. We could freeze spending in veterans, there's no impact. And we're saying, whoa, show us how you do that. They say, we're not giving you that information. So your job is not to see how money's not spent. We're taking that money away. I said, no, we did stimulus analysis. We're going to do austerity analysis. No, you can't do that. So we're saying, okay, we'll see you in court. Because my mandate is in the Act of Parliament. That's the law of the land. We could even test them. Everything. So in Einstein, in the middle of difficulty, you see opportunity. 100 years ago, Einstein thought maybe if we had two black holes and they came too close together, we have something called gravitational waves. That guy was smart. He wasn't even an economist. Just think of what kind of economist he could be. I would have hired him. Then there's this last quote. I'm getting to the end, I promise you. And George Bernard Shaw, there is no progress without change. Like these folks that are here today, that are getting these awards, all the nominees, they want change. They know they're trying to fix stuff. And we have to fix things. We need to revitalize politics. We have systems in Ottawa that don't work. We have documents that are gutted. There's no information in them. Even like the legislation for the Parliamentary Budget Office, it's not like a big deal, but you know what? We have a government now that says it wants to strengthen the office, make it an officer of Parliament, give it better access to information, use this office to help cost opposition platforms. And they say they're going to do this over the next, their mandate in the next 4 years. So maybe that's changed, right? Maybe there's this opportunity of progress. So I like that, this other quote, I'm done. I like that, you try, you fail. You try again, you fail better. You just keep going. You don't know whether there's going to be success, right? Not everybody's going to win. All the nominees are heroes here tonight. So let's work to support Springtime Collective. That's one of the reasons why I came here. Let's celebrate democratic politics in Nova Scotia. You know, otherwise you can have the Republican Party in the States, right? Let's thank all our nominees. And like Ronald Reagan, he passed away. Nancy passed away this week, and I saw that quote again. Ronald Reagan was famous for that. Like, you know, and I'm not a Republican, obviously. I'm not even a conservative, or I might be, I don't know, marijuana party. But, like, you know, the best times are ahead. If you revitalize politics, I think the chances of the best times ahead for the next generation are much better. Thank you very much.